Now let's pass to our distinguished colleague, Börte Sagaster, whose CV is so long, but the only thing I can say is that she has devoted her life to Orient, and her studies are amazing. Department of Oriental Studies in Hamburg, PhD in Oriental Institute Istanbul, then in the Department of Oriental Studies in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Heidelberg, in Mainz, okay, and in Gießen, sorry, and for the last 15 years, I think, in Cyprus, delivering her knowledge to the students. It's so, I can say a lot of things, but we don't have so much time, huh? So I give you the pass, and for this very fascinating topic of yours, please.
Thank you, Yorgos, for your kind introduction. I would like to start with a little video clip, and I hope I manage to share the screen.
Tadı, öylesine mutsuzum ki. Seninle paylaşmam lazım. Paylaş kuçlarım. Ama hep tamını kedinle paylaş. Yıllar yılı bir kere dedin mi? Tadı, gel bugün de benim on paylaşım dedin mi ha? Ama tadı. Yok, bu benim halin yaşım. Mert.
Efendim canım?
Benim.
Aşkım, benim o.
Hayır tadı benim o.
Benim o.
Yes, this is my kind of starting point. The commercial shows a scene that reminds us at first glance of scenes in the books of popular Turkish writer Hüseyin Rahmi Gürpınar or Ahmet Mithat, the most productive Tanzimat writer who we have heard of before in this conference. The black nanny or dade, who is cleaning the house here, is a figure that is still well known to Turkish readers through the novels and theater plays of Turkish writers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. However, while the dade figure in the early modern Turkish novels is depicted as a part of the Ottoman social life in the late 19th and early 20th century, the dade in this commercial is shown in a way that distances the scene from Turkish reality of the 21st century. It's from 2013. Neither is the nanny a real nanny, but a man disguised as a woman, nor is the color of the nanny really black. It turns out that the black color is just paint. And also the white girl is far away from contemporary reality, but her dress and hairstyle remind us of female characters in Turkish popular films of the Yeşilçam Turkish movie tradition in the 1950s. However, what the commercial shows us is that despite the fact that an established group of people with African origin lives in Turkey as Turkish citizens since generations, and despite the fact that in the 21st century, Turkey has increased its contacts with the African continent, and there are an estimated 33 to 35 African immigrants today alone in Istanbul, the perception of blackness in Turkey seems still to be shaped by old stereotypes. Bam Willowy, a researcher of Africana studies at Cornell University, has interpreted this in a recent article as a hint to the unchangeableness of popular imagination on blacks in Turkey. I quote, "The Turkish popular imagination cannot make a feminized African figure real." She speaks about this commercial. I got the hint to this from this article. She is forever a caricature whose labor makes the cleanliness and the order and the smooth functioning of a Turkish domestic sphere possible. Willowy contrasts then the stereotypical narratives in Turkish visual media, such as series and commercials, with the new narratives of the Black community in Turkey, which has been emerging for almost 20 years now. With the organization of public events, the publication of books, and with media presence in the form of TV and film documentaries that focus on oral history, Black Turkish citizens draw attention to the forgotten history and culture of the Afro-Turks, as they have started to name themselves. Today, Willowy argues, we have two divergent narratives on being Black in the Turkish media. One is the narrative based on the perception of Blacks by the white majority. The other is the self-image of Black people in Turkey. What I would like to do in the following is to add a little more color to this discussion by having a closer look at the depiction of Black people in Turkish folk and early modern Tanzimat literature. As not everybody may be familiar with the historical, social, and cultural framework of my theme, I will start with some words on the particular background of the history of Blacks in the Ottoman Empire and modern Turkey. People of Black origin have formed a little noticed part of the Turkish society since Ottoman times. Most of them are descendants of Black slaves who were brought from Africa to the Ottoman Empire since the 16th century. In the 19th century, the time in which slaves, mostly as minor characters, were part of the spectrum of characters in early Turkish novels and theater literature, there lived both Black and white slaves in the Ottoman Empire. Black slaves came to the Ottoman lands, especially from what is today Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and Sudan, while white slaves came mainly from the Caucasus. Black slaves, of which most were women, made out about 80% of all slaves in the third quarter of the 19th century. In the social context, Ottoman slavery differed markedly from the transatlantic slavery, which shaped Western notions of slavery. Although in the Ottoman Empire of the 19th century, agricultural slavery also existed, the form of slavery which was more widespread and which plays a role in literature is domestic slavery. While white slaves achieved in this system the highest prices on the market. Black slaves usually achieved lower prices than white ones. With the exception of the harem eunuchs, both male and female Blacks were used as domestic servants in low positions. After the foundation of the Turkish Republic in 1923, former slaves became Turkish citizens. The number of Turks with Black African origin is almost impossible to estimate, although there exist some numbers that range from 5,000 to 20 to 25,000, and some are even higher, like 200,000. Okay, the descendants of these slaves and of some other Africans who came not as slaves to the Ottoman Empire, but for other reasons, represent a tiny minority of today's Turkish population. Until they started to search for their own identity, encouraged also by political developments in and outside Turkey, like the rapprochement policy of the AKP government with the African continent and the nomination of the first Black president of the United States, Barack Obama, this group of the Turkish population was hardly noticed by the public. Even today, while many people in Turkey are aware of the many African immigrants, they are still unaware that there are Turks of African descent. I come now to the images of Africans in Turkish literature. I would like to start with some few words on Turkish folk literature, although I must say that I'm not a specialist on this, and I have here as my main source an article of Pertev Naili Boratav on that theme that is quite old, from 1951. In this article, Boratav makes some comments on the role of blacks, usually called Arab, in Karagöz's shadow plays and in fairy tales and traditional stories. Boratav's article indicates that the image of blacks in Turkish folk literature has many facets that reach from positive to extremely negative, like that blacks are sometimes portrayed as Hızır, a saint that does good and helps the distressed, or as mysterious creatures who live in mines and who bring luck to new-coming mine workers. There are also stories of whites disguising themselves as blacks, sometimes also transferring gender lines, as in a modern commercial that I showed, but with reverse roles. White Amazons disguise as black men, as they have made an oath that they would marry only the man who can overcome them. Many roles of blacks in folk literature are shaped by prejudice against dark skin color and indicate the grade of appreciation for blacks and the power relationship in Ottoman society, like the stories on princes who disguise as black men in order to test whether their beloveds love them even though they are black. Other stories expose prejudices against black skin, like a story from the 12th century of a mystic of dark color whose wife wishes he had a whiter complexion and is cursed for this by her offended husband. When the mystic dies, she has to marry Zengi Ata, a shepherd with dark black skin, who then becomes a mystic and sheikh of high esteem, so that she finally repents her behavior. On the other hand, Boratav also mentions other stories in which black people play an extremely negative role and are portrayed as terrifying giants, barbarians, and cannibals. In the first Western-influenced works of Turkish literature in the 19th century, blacks are portrayed as part of the Ottoman harem system. The main term for blacks in these texts is, like in folk literature, Arab. The proportion between black and white slaves that I referred to when I spoke about Ottoman slavery in the 19th century, a percentage of 80% black and 20% white slaves in Ottoman households, is not reflected in that literature. White female slaves are particularly popular characters in Tanzimat literature and play often a major role in the plot, while black slaves are present mainly as minor figures. Only male blacks are sometimes portrayed as main characters, as harem eunuchs with considerable power, which they misuse for intrigues and crimes. Female blacks hold important positions in some of the Tanzimat works as nannies, the dade of white children, housekeepers, or sometimes as cooks, aşçı. They are generally portrayed as positive characters who devote their whole existence to the well-being of their masters and who are extremely faithful. In the cosmos of Ottoman Istanbul, where most of the works play, they are a group that forms the lowest social fringe of society and accepts this without complaint, like it is in the novel Filatun Bey ile Rakım Efendi by Ahmet Mithat of 1875. The black woman Fedai, which means in Arabic, the one who is ready to sacrifice her life for somebody, is the nurse of Rakım Efendi, a young Ottoman bureaucrat. As his mother has died, Fedai runs, despite her old age, the whole household. In order to get some help for her, Rakım plans to buy another black slave, but then changes his mind and buys a white one. Fedai, the devoted, welcomes her warmly and does not allow her to do any work. I quote, "The honest black woman hadn't brought the girl for her own convenience. She had literally sacrificed her own comfort for the girl. Really, how good are the good ones among these blacks?" While the Fedai type of female black slave is portrayed also in the works of other Tanzimat writers as a positive, faithful, but uneducated, somewhat dumb and physically ugly character whose destiny seems to be eternal inferiority, like the caricature of a daddy in the commercial we saw, who cries out, "Bu benim alın yazım," this is my destiny. Black harem eunuchs play a rather negative role in Tanzimat literature. In Ahmet Mithat's novel Dünyaya İkinci Geliş of 1874, the scheming eunuch Mesut is one of the main characters. Mesut's appearance is described as extremely black, ugly, frightening, almost repulsive. The son of his master is afraid of him. His face is distorted by scar tattoos. The type of the scheming black harem eunuch is also dealt with in the work of another famous Tanzimat writer, Namık Kemal, in his theater play Karabela, Black Evil, which he wrote during his exile years in Cyprus. A freed black eunuch comes to the Mughal palace in India, where he pretends to be a slave in order to get close to the Mughal princess Peshawar. In both works, black eunuchs are portrayed as social outsiders whose role is shaped by their color, their impotence, their ugliness, their meanness. We can conclude that blacks in the works of Ahmet Mithat, Namık Kemal, and other Tanzimat writers who deal with the subject in a similar way remain very schematic and stereotypic as characters, different from Ottoman folk literature, where blacks are portrayed in a wider spectrum of roles that range from Islamic saint to man-eater. The roles blacks play in Tanzimat literature are restricted to their function as Ottoman slaves. And this brings me to the question, the theme of this conference, Turkish literature as a political platform. I have tried to show briefly how the perception of blackness in Turkish literature changed from a multidimensional image in Ottoman Turkish folk literature to a narrower perception that is characterized above all by the role of blacks as low servants in Ottoman households. This raises a number of questions. To what extent do the Western anti-slavery policies of the 19th century and the Western perception of slavery, shaped by the view on American slavery mainly, play into this image and thus ironically fix an image of blacks in Turkish social and cultural memory that condemns them, as Bam Willow's article indicates, to an eternal servanthood? To what extent do Western Orientalist notions of blacks as part of the Ottoman harem system play into this? Are there other alternative narratives in Turkish literature after the Tanzimat to the rather one-dimensional picturing of blacks in Tanzimat literature? Regarding the latter, I would like to say that this picture does not seem to be quite as one-sided as Willowy portrays it in her short essay, but one should look at different times in the Republican history to answer this question, and also at different literary genres, maybe. The place where this discussion mainly takes place seems to have shifted in the Republican period, slowly from literature to the visual media as the most popular platform. One should take a closer look, therefore, at the popular Yeşilçam movies and TV series and the Turkish TV series to learn more about this topic. The series Küçük Besleme, for example, based on the children's book of Kemalettin Tuğcu from 1977, also a forgotten author, but not forgotten by the Turkish television, obviously, was screened on TV between 1999 and 2001. The Turkish singer Esmeray, the artistic figurehead of the Afro-Turks today, plays in this series the daughter of a black servant who lives in poorness in a Turkish gecekondu. Thank you for your attention.